Hi, this is Mike of Black Cat Amplification, and I've got an amp demo here today. This is the Stereo Phoenix amp that I designed. This amp is actually two separate amplifiers built onto one chassis for a true stereo setup. So you have two totally independent amplifiers, and you can use one at a time, one or the other, or you can use them both at the same time, which is really great, especially when you're using stereo type things like a stereo reverb pedal or something like that, delay sounds, tremolo, which this thing does have on both sides as well. You can get some really interesting stereo tremolo sounds. I designed this because I really like the idea of those old Magnatone panoramic type amps where they had a stereo version amp, but I'm not so sure about that circuit, but I believe it's like one amp, maybe it's one amp with multiple channels, but I think there's two output transformers, and it does the stereo that way. This is maybe a little bit different because it's really two completely independent amps. So it is more of a true stereo. Not saying the Magnatone isn't, but I just don't know exactly how they have their output section designed. But this one is a lot like a JCM 800 in the preamp section on both sides, both amplifiers. The Phoenix amp is something I came up with, and I've been developing it for a while. I've built several different versions of the Phoenix amp, but it's really, it has that Marshall Plexi type of a sound, that Marshall Plexi bite to it. So I did tweak a few things in the preamp to give it a little bit even more gain and grit and more power sounding punch to the sound. But for the most part, it's 90 to 95% preamp wise like a Marshall JCM 800 on both sides. So you can do really nice cleans with it, and you can do some really cool breakup stuff with it as well. So I wanted to talk about the features before I get into the sounds, because if someone's interested in something like this, this isn't your typical amplifier, and there is a lot to this. I really built it because I thought this could be really, really nice as a recording rig, like a home recording rig or a studio recording rig. It could even be used live, like if you mic'd up some speaker cabinets, you could use it live. But one side is 3 watts and the other side is about 5 watts. And that's because one side is using a 6CL6 power tube, which is an awesome sounding tube, and it has some amazing gain. And the 6CM6 tube is electrically equivalent to a 6V6, which you may be familiar with if you've owned any Fender Champs or Princetons. They used a lot of the 6V6 tubes, which I love the 6V6 tube. This is just a smaller version of that tube. But it comes out at about 5 watts. Why did I make that different on the stereo amp? Well, they do have slightly different characteristics when they're pushed. It's the same preamp on both sides, the same features and the same controls, but you get a little bit different sound. So if you really like one for rock and one for cleans, you can set it that way and switch between the two, which is a pretty nice feature. So let's go through all the controls and the features, and then let's get into some sound demos. Okay, we're looking at the front of the amp here, and again, one side is one amplifier and the other is a completely separate amplifier. There's 2 inputs on this, so you have one input for this amp and one input for that amp. Now, how do I use this in a stereo type of setting when I'm going from my guitar directly into the amp? You would need something like a splitter, and you can use an AB pedal, ABY pedal, something like this, right? So you could plug your guitar in here or from your pedal board into here and go out to the amplifier using 2 outputs. But the way I like to use it is I have a stereo reverb pedal that I use, and I'm going to come down here to my board here, excuse the mess, but this reverb pedal, this Boss reverb pedal, is a stereo pedal, and it has 2 output. You can run it in stereo, right? It has 2 outputs. So as I plug my guitar into the chain, I have several pedals. My last pedal here is the reverb pedal because it has stereo outs. A lot of pedals have these now, different, delay pedals and things like that. So you don't even need an ABY splitter unless you wanted to switch between the 2 and have one turned on and one turned off, and then both on or both off, right? So let's go back to the amp, and I can show you that with the ABY pedal. So this one here, you actually have the ability to switch between amp A and amp B, and you can click the Y button and have both run at the same time. So it's just splitting your guitar signal out into the amp. You don't have to run this as a stereo amp. You can actually just run one side at a time and just turn one on, and you can leave the other one off. So for example, if I turn this side off, there's power switches on the side, I'll show that. This amp is only running right now, so I don't have to run both at the same time. And there's only one power cable for this amp. The power comes in and it powers both amplifiers. So that's kind of nice. You don't have to have two power cables, even though it's two completely separate amps. So I turn the power on, and there's a standby switch. Let me show that on the side here. You have two switches that are lighted, power on, and your standby on. And this over here, which is the same on the other side, is a couple jacks that I added in case you wanted a couple of the features to be foot switchable. And I'm not including any foot switches with this, but it's a standard mono jack type of a foot switch that you can use. Some people have Boss stations that they can program and control when they turn things on and off. So what I did here was just allow, if you want to make this foot switchable, you can have the boost feature, which is on the front here, make that foot switchable. You'd leave it on high up, basically, if you're going to use a foot switch, and then when you click the button, it turns it off, right? Turns the boost feature off. That's really to boost the gain. There's also a tremolo on and off here, and this is also switchable on the front of the amp as well. So if you're using a foot switch, you would turn the tremolo on and you plug the foot switch in and turn it on and off that way. Otherwise, you just use the controls on the front of the amp. So both sides of the amp have power switches and jacks for foot switches to control the features of boost and tremolo on both amps. Let's go through the controls here of the actual amp. And this is, again, the same on both sides, so I'll just talk about it on one side. There's the preamp, or the preamp gain type of a sound, control. And you have your high, mid, low for your EQ. There also is a pull boost for the highs, right? So you can boost your high end quite a bit by pulling this knob out. It's the only one that has a pull switch, but some people need that for, depending on the type of gain that they're using, and they really want that crisp, bright sound. You can boost this even higher and use the control that way. So that's kind of a nice feature. Also, the master volume is here, and of course we have the depth and speed for the tremolo section. Why did I add tremolo to this? Well, building a stereo amp, I said, what could I actually incorporate in this amp to make it really neat sounding when you're running both amps in stereo? It's a head unit, right? So it's not like a combo amp with reverb. Most people would probably use a reverb pedal or include reverb in their recording. So tremolo is kind of a neat feature because you can turn this and set this amp at one speed and set the other amp at a different speed and get this really neat warbling effect of the tremolo sounds that way, just by setting them differently. So you have depth and speed. There's a shift button here, and this is, switch. This is a three-way switch, right? So you turn your tremolo on, and the shift is actually shifting different sets of speed, right? So on the down position, it's going to be one setting of speed, and the middle and the up, you can quickly, say you wanted to cut the speed down without turning the knob and just switch it to another position. It kind of takes it and brings it down to a slower speed or a faster speed, depending on where you have it switched. So just a nice little extra feature to switch something on the fly. If this side's really fast and this side's not, you're trying to get them to sort of match, you can switch this to see if it brings it into equalization. So very neat little feature with the tremolo. And of course the boost switch is over here. This acts a lot like a high and a low input on most Fender type amps. Sometimes you'll see two jacks, input jacks, and you get a low input, which is a lower gain, lower volume, and you switch it to the high and it pumps in a little bit more volume, a little more punch, a little more gain, right? So that's the same on both sides. So you have a high and a low, or a boost is what I'm calling it on this amp. And that's the features on the front. Let's go to the back. All right, here's the back of the amp. I've unplugged the amp itself just because it made it easier with all these cables. So it's not turned on right now. But you have your power input here. This is where your IEC cable goes. There's a mains fuse, which controls both amps. And then there's two sides here, one for each amp, where you can set the impedance of your speakers being plugged in, and you also have 2 outputs to go to different speakers on each side. So you can plug in 2 cabs here, you can plug in 2 cabs for that amp and set your impedance accordingly. So say you had you know, a 4 ohm cab and a 16 ohm cab. You could run one 4 ohm cab here and switch this to 4 ohms and then switch this to 16 for the other cab. Or if you want to plug 2 cabs in on this side and say you had like 2 8 ohm cabs, you could switch this to 4 ohms, and that's what the amp would be looking for with 2 8 ohms plugged into one amplifier. Again, 2 16 ohms would be 8 ohm load, right? So very cool, very flexible in what you could do. You could have 2 speakers in one side and 1 in the other, add another one later, and set your impedance accordingly. So very flexible there on what you can do with your speaker options. The feedback here, it's not feedback as in you would hear feedback from a guitar being turned up really loud. This is negative feedback in the amp, and basically it's just a way to increase or decrease headroom of each of the amplifiers. So if you wanted a light feedback, you can switch it up. Off is the center position, or heavy feedback is the bottom position. Heavy feedback would be you're feeding a lot back into the amp, and light, of course, you're just going to change the way the amp breaks up by switching this. Leaving it off, there's no negative feedback, and that's going to be the loudest setting on these amps. So typically you'd probably leave it there, but if there's one amp that you're using all the time and you really have a clean sound that you like and you want a little bit more headroom, you can switch this accordingly on the feedback section and just adjust that amp. So just a nice little extra feature, especially in a recording application where you may find that it's just too much and you want to cut that or adjust that on one side or both sides. Okay, let's see what this thing sounds like. I've got both amps turned on in a low gain setting. It's just to preamp volume up a little bit. And the EQs are just adjusted slightly, mostly around noon. Tremolo's off, master volume's on about 3. And I have behind me here, I'll zoom out, there are 2 speaker cabs that this thing is plugged into. I have a Mesa Boogie 412 speaker cabinet over here, which is 8 ohms, which is on this side of the amp, and this Marshall 412, which has vintage 30s in it, and that's running at 16 ohms on this side. So that's the way we have it set up currently. Zoom back in here so you can see the controls, and both amps are on. Now what makes this really, really cool is, remember I plugged into this stereo reverb pedal. Because it is splitting my signal into one amp and into the other amp, the reverb effects will go into true stereo mode. So take a listen to this. Amazing stereo reverb sound with that pedal. But yeah, the amp, having 2 completely separate amps going to 2 completely separate cabs, give you that stereo effect when that is turned on. Really huge, big stereo sound, which is awesome. You can't really get that with just a single amplifier. You can get a really nice reverb sound, but to be in stereo with a single guitar just makes it amazing sounding. So I just have a kind of a basic modulation sound on. Let's turn it just to a basic room sound. Let's see. Let's turn the time up a little. So this is just a basic room reverb sound, but it is in stereo. Really neat sound. It's it sounds like you're in a really big room because it's kind of echoing from both sides. Switch back to modulation. Just sounds so amazing through stereo. Amazes me every time I plug in and turn on both amps. We can cut, we can change different things, right? So I can put this on the low input, this side, the high input. I can, let's say I wanted to cut the highs on this side and boost them on this side. Right, let's turn the tremolo on and take a listen to that. So I'm just going to put it on one side right now. I'm going to turn the switch on to engage it. Let's turn the depth up quite a bit so we can hear it. Okay, let's get the speed up. We may need to cut this amp out so you can hear this, because I don't have that one on. Let's turn the master up a bit. So I have a speed control. And this is that shift I was talking about. So listen to the speed of it. Slowed it down. Put it on the up position. Middle goes a little bit faster. So you could kind of shift it to different speeds. Let's go ahead and turn it on this side too. So I have this amp, the tremolo's turned off. This one, it's turned on, which actually sounds pretty cool. It's a very subtle sound because this one it's off. So let's turn it on now, and let's give it some depth. I'm gonna try to set it very similar to the other one. I think it was on. Wow, listen to that. It's because they're not exact, right? They're very, you know, when I switch the switch, it's not exact, but it's similar. So it gives it a really nice little stereo tremolo sound. So I got the reverb pedal off. Let's turn the speed up. So this one's going really fast and this one's a bit slower. Let's turn the speed down. Let's get a lot of different kind of warbly effects here. Set the speed at noon, so they're pretty close. And we can switch one to be faster. So take that and use the tremolo with something like a reverb, which I have on now, and you can really get some neat sounds. Let's turn the speed down on both. Very neat features with the tremolo. Let's take a listen to what this thing can do when we pump some gain into it. Okay, my settings are very similar here. I'm going to go ahead and just turn these controls down, even though I switched off tremolo. And I've got my bridge pickup on now on this Fender Strat, so it's a little bit hotter of a sound. Switch these hot, boosts off. Boost on. Let's go ahead and turn this amp off for right now and just focus on this one. See how the gain's coming through. Okay, let me turn this one off. Let's turn this one on. We're plugged into a different type of speaker, right? So we are going to get a little different sound. So let's pump in. So the gain's up pretty almost all the way. Let's turn this side on, both sides. Let's put some reverb on. I'm just going to put that room reverb on to give it some depth. Because we can. Gotta turn the effect down just a bit. So it's got that plexi bite, right? Very, very similar to a Marshall JCM 800. That's with no gain pedals, just the gain from the amp. Let's boost the mids on both. Let's crank the highs a bit more. Kind of a nice breakup sound. So let's turn the pedal off, and I'm gonna hit it with a boost. Okay, this is a Klon type boost, Klon clone. Okay, and I don't have the. I've got just all the controls at noon, so it's not a lot of gain, but it will boost it quite a bit. So here's with it off. Both amps, the preamps are all the way up. Klon is on. So I do need to adjust this a bit because it is a little spiky sounding, right? So let's turn our highs down. Let's cut our mids back just a hair. Okay, let's listen to one side. I'm going to turn the standby on this, so just this side with a Mesa Boogie cabinet. This side. And both. Let's see if we can dial in a little bit more gain and get this sounding a little more Eddie Van Halen-ish. It's not going to be exact, but... Pedals off now. Let's hit it with some tremolo, even though it's gainy. Whoop. I hope that's coming through my recording here, but it sounds really amazing because it's happening at different times. Really neat sounding gain structure in this thing. And again, you've got two different tubes, so they have slightly different, just slightly different sounds in the breakup when you really crank the amp, which I haven't really done yet because it's pretty freaking loud. But my neighbors are home, so I can't really do that for too long. But it sounds really good cranked. Let's cut that gain back again. Let's get some clean sounds. Hit the reverb. Excuse me. Let's put that modulation on. Let's do some delay, actually. This pedal has some delay. I'm not really good with delay. I don't use it a lot, but this will have a really nice stereo delay sound. Highs out to get a little bit smoother sound, not as much of a bite. Really pump the lows to get that depth. Delay a little bit. Just an awesome sound. Oh man. Let's turn some trem on. Let's turn the speed down. I think that was actually... So we've got delay and the tremolo, right? The delay is coming from the stereo reverb. Again, this is Mike from Black Cat Amplification. Thanks for watching this demo video. This is the Stereo Phoenix amp. I know this was a long one, but if you stuck in there and you're interested in something like this, please check it out. It's on reverb.com. It's being sold, listed right now, and I can make more of these if you're interested. But really, really neat stereo rig. And again, it's 3 watts and 5 watts on each side, 2 totally separate amps. You can run one or both at the same time. You just need to split your guitar signal into it that way. So very cool. If you have any questions, please let me know. But yeah, the Stereo Phoenix.